Hello, viewers.
Howdy.
It's Adam. You all love Adam, which is probably the only reason you're going to watch this video, because he's in it. I had the idea while we were listening to NPR in the car the other day, and they were talking about, like, books that changed you or formed you or whatever, and I was like, I don't think any books, like, formed me. But then he and I had a conversation about, like, influential books in our lives, and I was like, this could be a video.
And I will admit, like, the NPR program were like, this one chapter changed my life, or was a pivotal awakening, and none of us are quite to that level, but we've definitely had influential works that did
help the trajectory, I guess. So what I'm thinking is we can just go back and forth and each share influential books that got us into reading, in my case books that got me into writing. So that's it. That's the whole video. Okay, are we starting with the book that got us into reading, or the author that got us into reading?
Yes.
Okay.
So part of this is I'm also focusing on early Adam, 16 and younger, and it's probably most of them are younger than 16, but I can't really differentiate the high school years, so this might be like 14 and younger, really. But the first two things that really got me into reading were Nintendo Power, classic magazine.
Anyone who's not a millennial watching this is like, what?
6 great issues plus 6 free strategy guides on a hot new game. That's twice the power for still $15. Wow, go now.
I mean, they stopped publishing it, but it was a special video game magazine just for video games released on Nintendo consoles.
And, like, back in our day, before the internet, it was like the only way to find out about new upcoming games, cheats, like all kinds of stuff that you just like couldn't find out because there was no internet.
And then the other thing that really got me into reading was my 4th grade teacher, Mr. P. So Mr. P would read us The Black Cauldron about half an hour to an hour every day, and they would even do voices and like I can't do it, but Gurgi had this really high-pitched, squeaky voice, kind of like
sounds annoying.
Mixed between like Grover and somebody else, and yeah, it was delightful. We loved the voices Mr. P did. A side note, tidbit, favorite fact from Adam: Mr. P was not only my favorite grade school teacher, they were also my favorite college professor.
Oh, dang.
His daughter and I had a chance of hooking up at one point.
Do you think you had a chance with any girl that spoke to you? The Black Cauldron series is great, and I also read it as a youngin', but I don't think I'm going to count it as one of my influential book series, even though I do remember it fondly, and I do need to reread it. I was thinking about what, like, actually got me into reading, and there's a couple of different book series that really hooked me when I was very young, and I was starting to read chapter books for the first time. The Borrower series, which is about Ariete, who's a tiny little person who lives in the walls of a house with her mother and father, and just like, it's just their lives. They're very cozy. Like, it's just these tiny people just trying to survive in the walls, and they go outside of the house eventually, like they have to leave for some reason, and then they're like floating down the river in a teapot. It's just very sweet and very cozy.
That journey reminds me a lot of Marvin the Mouse, I think.
There's similar stories that star mice. It's not like it was the most original concept ever, but I really liked it. It also got me into audiobooks because my mom would get us The Borrowers on cassette tape, and I would read along with the cassette tape.
Now do I bring up the one that got me into audiobooks, or probably prompted me to be okay with audiobooks?
You could do that later. And the other one that got me into reading was, I was telling Adam about this, the Hank the Cowdog series, which I actually went on Half Price Books website and bought like 3 of the books in the series because I want to revisit them. But it's about a dog, and I was very into dogs as a child, so that was score 1.
Just as a child.
Now I've branched out. I'm very into all animals now. The second thing is that Hank, the main character, is kind of an unlikable main character. Like, he is out for himself all the time. He's snarky. He's kind of mean sometimes. He always learns a lesson at the end, but immediately forgets it by the beginning of the next book. And there's just something, like, attractive to a kid about a character who's not just, like, good and wholesome all the time, and is just kind of like fuck you, I've got mine, but in a very safe for middle grade kind of way. Okay, so now we have talked about what got us into reading, but what were some influential books throughout our lives?
I'm doing doubles for my first couple. First, I want an honorable mention. I couldn't figure out the name of this book, but this is the first book I remember like reading on my own, and it had a plot twist, and like basically once I got into reading, once I got bored of rereading the same issue of Nintendo Power 24 times, I just wandered into my grade school's library, and this was one of the first books I found and enjoyed. And it was a little bit of a mystery. 2 or 3 people had died and or been murdered, and were like, one died of old age, and their names were named after each of the 4 cardinal directions, and then there was the 4th one who was like kind of leading the characters through to help them solve the mystery, because for some reason he couldn't just do it themselves. But the 4 characters who were named at the cardinal directions, that several of them had died, were all actually the same person. And
if anybody can identify these books, like, drop it in the comments, because I want to know what this is. I've never heard of it.
And they were played by, like, the same, I think, like, a young woman, if not a young girl, played all 4 of these people. Yeah, it was like a twist that young Adam, didn't see coming. After that, I don't think this was, like, the next book I read, but I eventually picked it up and then read the whole series, and it was the first probably series I read, and it was the Dark is Rising series, starting with Oversea and Understone by Susan Cooper. And I remember I read the first one, and then we were going on like a road trip, and I'm like, let's get the rest from the library. And I read like most of the rest on a road trip to some family gathering, and that was like my first young adult fantasy journey that I read on my own and had a series. And ever since then, I've like, oh, there's only one book? It's barely worth reading.
He just loves a good long series, which is not something that I enjoy. I liked them more when I was a kid. Reminds me, to go with Hank the Cowdog and the Borrowers, there was also the Boxcar Children series, because there were 8 bazillion of them. So like anytime you went to the library, you could probably pick out a different Boxcar Children book. So the next books that I'm going to talk about were influential to me as an author as well as a reader. The first one is the Redwall series, starting with the book Redwall by Brian Jacques. And the reason that these were so special to me, I think my grandmother gave me Redwall for Christmas one year or something like that. It was the first time I ever sort of connected with the fact that books had authors. I don't know how I found out about Brian Jacques, but like I found out, the story goes that he was just telling stories about these mice to a school for the blind, and one of his friends was like, you really should write these down, and then he did, and the Redwall series was born. I have no idea if this is true.
I actually created the story for the School for Blind Children in Liverpool, just wanting to write a story for them, a timeless adventure.
But I think it's cooler than J.K. Rowling writing Harry Potter on a napkin, so there. And he often has blind characters, so like the blind students were very important to him as a person, and for the first time, I connected that the people whose names are on these books are real people, and then that made me go, wait, I'm a people? I could be like Brian Jacques and write books, and like that was a big like awakening moment for me, and I was obsessed with him as a kid, like as an author. He was the only author that I really ever researched or followed. I wrote him fan mail. He never answered. I probably sent it to the wrong place. I entered Brian Jacques writing contests. By that time, the internet was starting to be a thing. We didn't have it at home, but we could get it at the libraries, trying to like find out his latest Q&A or whatever. So he was like also my first fandom, probably. But yeah, he was the first time that I realized that he was an author and he was a person. And the other one was Tamara Pierce. That's right. I didn't follow her as obsessively as Brian, but she was another person who I connected author to books, where I was like, she's a person with a face and I can relate to her, and I really loved her books when I was growing up, and there's some that I still very much love. I do want to do a video someday that's like ranking all of her books. She was also very influential, and you can see little bits of her style still in my style, and also Brian's style. cribbed heavily from him as a young author.
Alright, my next ones are, by this point, by the time I started reading these, I was already very much entrenched in my high fantasy. As a young reader, Adam was very high fantasy. That was almost all I read. But then I read, and I think I reread, The Lord of the Rings, and also all of the Wizard of Earthsea series by Ursula K. Le Guin.
Was good. I read Earthsea as well.
They kind of cemented me into the high fantasy. Surprisingly, I don't feel that these two series were as influential as the other series on this list, but a lot of the other series definitely tie back to these, so I kind of have to start, or, well, be in the middle with these.
But another book that is fairly predictable that completely, like, consumed me when I was a kid, because I was a big rereader, so I would reread things a million times. And probably my most reread book of all time to this day is The Hobbit. I was obsessed with it when I was a kid. I would read it and then just get to the last page, turn the book, back at the start. You know, just like I practically had that thing memorized. I could still do the beginning, you know, in the hole in the ground there with the Hobbit. I could do that whole thing. Obsessed. And it's not even like a style that I enjoy reading in anymore. Tolkien's...
She just is very jealous of the Hobbit-y lifestyle.
I am a Hobbit. I would love to live that life. The funny thing is I went to read Lord of the Rings. I think I was probably about 12 because I loved The Hobbit so much. And I was like, I'll love the Lord of the Rings too. And I made it halfway through the second book. I was like, I hate this. It was the fucking Council of Elrond that did it for me. Even though I got past that, I was like, what is this? I'm so bored. So I haven't picked up The Lord of the Rings since, but I would reread The Hobbit in a heartbeat.
The reason I had to mention Lord of the Rings and The Wizard of Earthsea were because the next most impactful book for me in the series that other than The Lord of the Rings, this was the first series that I reread ever. And they are The Belgariad and the Malaroon by David and Leigh Eddings. At the time of writing these, David was not admitting that his wife was co-authoring these with him.
Smooth.
He later on, his later works at the end of his life, he did admit, but the two things that stuck out, that really impacted me, one is the Belgariad was written as a series and especially the first book in the series, to relive the traditional high fantasy hero's arc or journey that J.R.R. Tolkien established. So it's very much in homage to Tolkien and the Lord of the Rings. And then the second half of that is you can very much see there are multi-cast, multi-POV stories, and this starts to really influence me. I love multi-POV stories. I want to see more casts and more characters in it. But you could clearly see the voice of the female characters that were written by his wife and the banter between the male and female characters and the style. It was obvious to me, even as a young Adam, that he's like, oh, somebody else is writing these with him. And I young Adam didn't have any idea who.
Right.
It was one of the first stories I read where characters bantered and played with each other and played off of each other. And then again, that high fantasy series, I reread The Belgariad and the Malaroon, and then I also read through all the other series that the two of them had written at that time. So yeah, first series I reread, enjoyed the heck out of them. The Sparhawk universe is one of the other series that I enjoyed. You could tell in that series too which characters his wife wrote and which characters David wrote. Those are it for the ones that were very really impactful as a youth.
Same, I'm kind of out of the ones that were I could talk about ones that were my favorites, but we're talking about impact. And what about The Wheel of Time, your favorite book series of all time?
So that did start coming out in 96, but I actually was not introduced to it until my sophomore year in college. I feel I was 22, I was 20-something. I was not 22. I was 20, 21 at the time. So I didn't start reading it till later on.
Which is fine. If it was, I think at any point in our lives, if books or series are like influential, and I would definitely call A Wheel of Time to be extremely influential to you.
It is, and it is probably my favorite series. And I was talking to a friend about this the other day, and I think the key concepts is it as well started off as an homage to The Lord of the Rings. And you can see it in a lot of the different characters and the monsters in the series. Like, oh yeah, this is definitely inspired by The Lord of the Rings. So it had a very familiar and enjoyable feel to me as I entered into the world. And then the fact that it's 13 books long, each of the books are long, and there was oftentimes a 2-year-ish, sometimes 3-year, because the books were so long, break between the books. So I came in at about book 5 or 6 in the series, and then I'd have to wait a couple years for the next book, and then I'd forgot what would happen and reread the series. And so every couple years I'd reread the series in preparation of the next book coming out. So it was this familiar thing, harkening back to the Lord of the Rings influences that were a big influence on my young reading life. And then I would, every couple of years, come back to it and have that refreshing vibe. And I probably, during the plague years, re-listened to it on Audible at least 12 times.
I have never read or listened to the entire series, but I could probably tell you more about it than most people, even some fans, because I've heard snippets of it, and also we've like talked about it, and I'll be listening, and I'll be like, "What's going on?" And he'll be like explain the whole situation to me. So I'm sure there's stuff I still have no idea about, but I'm pretty familiar. I have no desire to read it myself. It is not my style whatsoever. I would be driven insane trying to get through that series, but I don't mind hearing bits of it. Unless you can think of anything. I don't think I have any books or series that were hugely influential in my adult life.
I think you could revisit Redwall. Because
I could, yeah. I definitely read that much longer than, like, the age group is more middle grade, early young adult, and I definitely enjoyed it well into my late teens.
When I met you, I'd only, read one book in the series, or something like that. And then after getting to know you, that is when I read the whole series. And I think there were some Redwall books that you had not yet read at that time. So I know in your early 20s, you were reading Redwall.
Yeah, I've only not read one of them, and that is the most recent one before he died. And I don't know why I haven't read it yet. Maybe it's because if I finish it, that feels like it's like, you know, he's actually gone then. If there's always one book that I haven't read, then the series kind of continues for me.
I'm going to give you another one that you've read as an adult that I do feel is influential, especially as you as a writer, as an author. And that's going to be back to Tamara Pierce as a rerun, but specifically the Becca Cooper series.
My viewers have heard me recommend that a bazillion times, and no one's ever come back and told me that they read it. You all are letting me down so much.
Specifically, though, the play between the characters in that, the kind of, it's kind of a buddy cop film book. And that deepness of relationship between friends is something you really aspire towards in a lot of your writing.
A lot of it is friendship-based. Like, there's often romance in Tamara's books, but it's usually not the focus of the book. And even when she writes romance, I usually enjoy it. But the Becca Cooper series is my favorite one, and even though it's kind of sad, Dragonfly, the book that I ended up shelving, was very much sort of homage to Becca Cooper in a lot of ways. So it's too bad that I've kind of shelved it, and I don't know if I'll return to it or not. But if you haven't read Becca Cooper, I'm serious. What are you doing? Why are you if you like fantasy?
Why do you consider yourself a reader of books?
Let's not get that serious. If you don't like fantasy, you probably won't like this, but when Tamara's, she's not always on, in my opinion. There are some books of hers that I don't like, but when she's on, she's really on, and I think she nailed it in the Becca Cooper series.
So, I am going to be a little bit mushy because I can.
Oh no.
A old Adam adult book that was influential for him. I've been in a reading dearth. When I was a kid, there was literally a summer where I read almost 1,000 books in that summer. Oh,
that's a mood. I used to do that kind of thing too.
And, I would devour books. But it has been a very long time since there was a long time that I did not pick up a book that it was not a chore, that it was for work or research or study. not for fun for years, probably.
Yeah,
And-
I think like early in our marriage, you were still very into reading, and I was like always finding you reading, but then slowly it kind of tapered off. We call it a reading slump here, but it was a long slump.
And part of it is because I was mostly a high fantasy reader, and that is all I read, and I've read all of it, and everyone who's writing it writes about the same thing. But anyways, the book that got me out of my slump was the aforementioned doomed Dragonfly. And I don't know what it was about it, but it rekindled my energy to read. And I'm nowhere near the reading levels of my youth still, but I am actually picking up books to read for fun. And I've gone through, I feel like a dozen, maybe two. Well, so if you count Audible books, I've gone through.
We do. We count audiobooks here.
All right.
We are an audiobook family. And we
So
stand that.
I've probably on like 40, 50 books since I've gotten through Dragonfly.
Maybe it was so bad you were like, I need to find something bad. I need to cleanse my
It
palate.
wasn't, though. I enjoyed it.
I wrote it, I mean, I was enjoying it while I wrote it, but it wasn't with the kind of passion that I got writing Adventurer Mage. Like, Adventurer Mage was like, I couldn't not write it. If I didn't write it, I would die. And I didn't feel that way about Dragonfly. It felt like a little bit more like an obligation because I was writing it as a sequel to a book that I had recently put out. I was like, okay, you put out a book, now it's time to write the sequel. And I enjoyed writing it, but it wasn't like fire in my soul. Like, the Adventurer Mage series is like, if you don't write this, I don't know what happens, but it won't be good. Oh, you were going to say the book that got you into audiobook. I'm making this video even longer for myself, but here we go.
Well, this is weird and is an insight into the youth that I had, but the first audio books I listened to and got me in the, like, it was years between that and the next audiobook I listened to, but they were the Salty the Psalm book.
Oh no! Oh
audio
no!
series.
I'm so sorry.
And we would listen to them in class as we were doing art and other things. And I think we had all of them. Salty the Psalm book and his wife Harmony.
He had a wife?
Yes, and he had a series of kids.
Psalm, he had children?
Yes.
Okay, wait. A sentient book can have a wife and children, but gays can't get married. If anybody doesn't know what Salty the Psalm book is, that's it. He's a sentient book of psalms, and he does, like, Bible stories for little children.
He's like a Christian Barney from the 90s or 80s.
But 80s, and, like, kind of like, there was, like, a live action,
Okay,
I believe.
but Barney is cringe, so
No,
it's
no,
like
no,
it
no.
is. It's
No, Barney is cringe, but salty.
Oh, kids, I'm so glad you could come to the worship workshop today.
The worship workshop today.
Go watch that at your own risk. I got into audiobooks by listening to radio plays and old-time radio. I actually have a video about that no one has watched. Are you ready for the goodbye, Adam? Do you remember how to do the goodbye?
I think so.
It's been a long time.
It has.
All right. Oh, I forgot to say, follow me on all my social media. You can also find me on Patreon. For donations there, go towards helping me publish my own books. So if you want to read books that get you inspired, like Adam over here, then check that out. And also check out the book that I have, books that I have published already. All right. Now are you ready for the goodbye?
Always ready.
3, 2, 1.
Bye.
Oh, I'll see you again next time with whatever it is I happen to be doing next time.
I have friends, I definitely have friends. Friends, friendly friends. Time to meet my friends.
SV, Celia, Thea, Alyssa, Rita, Deborah, Afra, Melissa, AC, Swamp Goblin Waifu, Ashley, Sophia, Merween, Kit, Hidden Glade, Light Julie, Belle, Patrick, and Sophie, Ray, Shelby, Zaire, Jesper, Rennie, Scribbling Cat, Savvy, Jenny, Amanda, Lisa, and Sarah. Thanks for being my friends.
I actually created the story for the School for Blind Children in Liverpool, just wanting to write a story for them, a timeless adventure. And so, being a writer with a writer's imagination, I decided to set it in Redwall, which is just a place of my imagination and a composite of other things. Forests you've been, places, country places, old stone houses, monasteries, abbeys, castles,